Well, we'll call the meeting such as it is to order at 4:05 p.m. For attendance, we have Mark Perka and Roy Gott, co-chair on the committee, and we have Kendra Jo Grindle from the Maine Connectivity Authority. We don't have a quorum, so we're going to skip approval of minutes. We just got Sandy. We still technically don't have a quorum, so we'll still skip the minutes and we'll go straight to Kendra Jo.
Okay, perfect. Let me pull this up and see. Oh, can you turn on the sharing, Roy? That would be great. All right, you should be able to see this slide deck. So when I last joined you, I gave you kind of an overall of BEAD as a program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. This is funding from Congress that's been designed and developed by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA. Maine is receiving about $272 million to deploy through this program. I wanted to start with the current timeline that we have. So as you can see here, and as I updated previously, we've been through all of these initial proposals. We've drafted, submitted, had both of them approved. The second proposal was approved back in June. So throughout this process, waiting for those approvals, we've been able to do a challenge process in which providers, municipal organizations, residents through speed testing, we're all able to challenge available service, the availability of service on a map. So wanting to ensure that while at any time folks could challenge locations, this is a very specific time where anyone could challenge the availability of service within a community at a location, to really try to narrow in and make sure we are counting the right locations as unserved, underserved under the federal standards. Right now, we've been moving through the BEAD project service area draft. When we discussed those before, and I'll mention them throughout this, it's kind of the focus because it's the biggest update. Those project service areas are a collection of all of the eligible service locations throughout the state of Maine under the BEAD program. Again, that's the federal definition. So anything less than 100/20, so 100 megabits per second download, at 20 megabits per second upload. Those above that by the federal standards are considered served. We know that in Maine, we consider those underserved until they reach 100/100. But for this discussion and what we're focused on, those locations will be less than 100/20. The project service areas are being drafted. We have to submit those and all of the locations to NTIA for review and approval. So up until we get approval, they'll always be draft until they say yes. We don't think there'll be substantial changes, but there could be. And then we go into subgrantee pre-qualification. We are targeting that for this fall. Or actually, sorry, it opens in middle of September. The pre-qualification is for any prospective applicant, eligible entity to submit a pre-qualification proposal to us. We'll have a full outline in our portal of questions and documentation needed to verify that they qualify for BEAD funding. A lot of this is standard across the program. So many providers who may operate in another state that has already opened their pre-qualification would have already gone through a similar process. While we might have a few different questions, the basis of it is fairly similar. Once we wrap the pre-qualification and move those subgrantees or move those qualified entities forward for approval by our board, then we're able to open the subgrantee selection application window in late fall and run that process through winter and spring. All this to try to get to a final proposal in spring of 2025. The subgrantee selection period is when all of those project service areas, all of the eligible locations will be bid on by an eligible entity that's been approved to participate in the BEAD program in the state of Maine. So a little different than what we have seen in the past with grant programming. The pre-qualification, as I mentioned, it's conducted at the organizational level. So we're looking for organizational health, financial health, and sustainability, trying to really gauge if the provider or municipality or utility district, whatever that entity is coming in able to not only bid, but receive the fundings through the program. This is just a little bit more about the pre-qualification, financial, technical capacity, managerial capacity. We also look to their capacity to support communities and the overall ownership, information, operational capacity. So the kind of key focus for today is sharing a little bit more about project service areas. Again, these remain draft and we won't have them public until that pre-qualification period opens. But when it does open, anyone can go in and view the maps that have the project service areas within them. They're not just for, it'll be a ArcGIS link. So anyone can do that without having to go into the portal and create an application. The project service areas are polygons, again, that are composed of those serviceable locations throughout the state. We are required to have at least 80% of those locations in any given PSA, and I'll show kind of what that looks like and how we have had to rework some PSAs to allow for that. There is the ability to have what they consider served locations within the PSA. They can't exceed 20%. The final draft of PSAs is moving forward, but again, they're not considered final until NTIA approves them. Once they do that, then we can move into the next steps of this process. The PSAs look at those on and underserved locations, everything below 100/20, to determine that were determined by the state-led challenge process that we went through earlier in the spring. We define these PSAs based on geographical features, density and distribution, road networks, municipal boundaries, and input from community stakeholders and ISPs. While municipal boundaries are taken into account, I would say that as you look at previous grant programs where municipal boundaries really try to be the border for grant projects, this is not necessarily the case when we're looking at PSAs. We will have PSAs that are grouping based on those locations, based on existing infrastructure, known infrastructure, density of those locations in an area, and it could be that it crosses over 2 or more towns. What we know from just experience in the space, sometimes the most rural area of one community where you have a pocket of unserved locations is right across the town boundary of another pocket of locations in the next town over. Those kind of taking municipalities into consideration helps, but we want to make sure we're not leaving those areas behind or making them harder to bid on or have harder access to. We do want to acknowledge that where there's been activity in communities working together, that we're trying to put PSAs in place that allow for communities that have regionalized to try to stay together, as well as where there's been private sector partnership with a community or interest to date. I think Schoodic is a good one where, you know, our data analyst is well aware of the fact that these two communities are working together. The information that you all have gathered to date and been able to share with us of how the infrastructure is coming into your community, and what that looks like for efficiency purposes, as well as trying to keep consistent provider access throughout communities, especially neighboring communities that work closely together. So we're not seeing an inequity across the region. There are two types of PSAs. The grouped locations are the areas that are less populated, not fully built out with wired infrastructure, and on the outskirts of existing infrastructure, kind of what you're probably already thinking about when we're talking about this, those groups of, you know, 10, 20 plus locations that are fairly close together, and can be put into one large project service area. There are also what you see throughout here, these dots, that are noise locations, or what we consider noise locations. Areas with very few locations, almost no existing wired infrastructure to get to them. This happens throughout the entire state. We often think of these locations being in the North Woods, being camps out in Western Maine, but we do have these noise locations throughout every county in the state. And it's just, they will count for their own PSAs, or we'll continue to try to find ways to group them together in a way that makes sense. And maybe that's looking at alternative technologies, or other investments in the middle mile infrastructure to get to them, so that they can be grouped together in a larger PSA. The 80-20 rule is one that I think is helpful for folks to understand. One, because it does allow for some of those served locations to be picked up in a PSA. It does accommodate for the fact that eligible entities will have to build through served areas at times to get to those unserved locations. And that infrastructure that's passing by will still be invested in by BEAD funding. It also means that there's the potential for those providers to pick up those locations or offer service in areas that may already have some degree of service. But it does mean that we have to break up PSAs to accommodate this 80%, 20% rule. So the example that we're given here is one where you kind of want to draw a big polygon around this area, just given the density of unserved locations, those oranger locations. However, by picking up these additional served green dots throughout this PSA, it does make it have more locations, served locations, than 20%. So the PSA would end up looking like this, where we have to draw along this area and cut out those green locations. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be infrastructure still running by it when this is funded and built. Doesn't mean that the provider can't pick it up, but it does mean that we can't invest BEAD funds in any access points to these locations. The other way that we have to divide, the other ways that we might divide PSAs is areas that are quite large, and we could divide based on a town line. If we know that it's just too large and cumbersome to pick up, or if we know that there's not existing road infrastructure or wired infrastructure crossing these town boundaries. In some areas, we do know that the roads are not, while in some areas we know that the roads are crossing and it's consistent to keep with that road line, and it kind of ignore the town boundary. Some areas we know that we do need to divide them up. Natural boundaries is the other, where we might see rivers, lakes becoming that boundary for us, where we start to separate the town boundaries. It doesn't mean that a provider cannot pick up both PSAs or all of these PSAs. It might be that they come in and say, you know, the river doesn't matter to us. We serve on both sides and we want to pick up this full area. But it does allow for multiple providers multiple providers to bid, or provider to only select one or more. The next steps we have for these project service areas is truing them up as we move through the end of August. Version 4 of the FCC fabric has come out, so we just want to make sure that it's as up to date with current data as possible. We had to build it on a different version, and while there aren't significant changes in each version, there are some. And getting the PSAs and the list of eligible locations submitted to NTIA to ensure that they can approve and we can finalize those PSAs. Again, once those PSAs are finalized is when we can go into pre-qualification. It's when folks will really see the PSAs for your community. And I think that would be a really great opportunity to come back and share. And while I would have wished we would have had it for this conversation, needing them to be finalized and not getting folks confused with what's draft and what's not, and the changes that might happen in their community with the PSAs. We're holding back on those until the pre-qualification goes live. And again, that link, that map is going to be open and available to everyone. You don't have to get into the portal and be an applicant to see it. So we will be able to walk through what those PSAs look like in your region and maybe why those PSAs are designed the way they are designed for your area. So I'm gonna stop. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there because I feel like that's the kind of bulk of our BEAD update. We are continuing to have monthly updates, public updates for anyone interested in BEAD. They also are focused towards our ISPs and utility districts, those that are really looking to go through the pre-qualification and apply, as well as some consultants and others in the space that are watching it. Those happen monthly. The next one is on September 9th, I believe. And then we are having BEAD updates, I wouldn't say every month, but maybe every quarter or around a milestone with the Maine Broadband Coalition's Let's Talk Broadband Friday conversations. Those are every Friday at 11. So just trying to keep the information flowing for folks. And as you know, I think as we get PSAs, as we get the pre-qualification completed as well, we'll have a public list of all of the entities that have qualified to bid within BEAD or participate within the BEAD program in the state of Maine. So that'll give folks a better understanding of who in the space or maybe even outside of Maine space is looking to participate and have some conversations around that as well. Any questions from you all? I just talked at you for about 15 minutes, so.
All right,
When would
Mark.
we be able, yeah, I had a quick question. When would we be able to see that set of maps for the PSAs, or at least the link to it? I understand they're still in draft form, but it sounds like that's
Yeah.
a month or two out yet. Is that right?
So, just a second, and I will get you I'll get you a firm date, as firm as it can be. So our pre-qualification opens September 12th. And that is when applicants and anyone really will be presented with a map of the draft PSAs. So September 12th is when that link will be live. Yeah, and again, with the caveat that they're draft, but it does allow us through the pre-qualification. One thing I didn't mention, those entities that are going through the pre-qualification, we are going to ask them to indicate to us as much as they can where they're interested in those PSAs. It will give us, you know, as a little bit more information in terms of where is there multiple providers or utility districts or others that are looking to bid on an area. We might see areas that have multiple bids and scoring will come into play there. It will also show us where maybe there's no bid in areas, and it gives us the opportunity to talk with those folks that do qualify and say, well, why wouldn't you have been interested in this? Is there something we can do to it to make it a little bit more enticing? Is it cost? Is it location? Is it too small? Is it too large? And so we'll be able to have some of those conversations and try to right size fit them a little bit. Right now, I think we're still up around 600, above 600 PSAs. Because you have to remember that they are both those larger group PSAs, but also those noise points. You can have a PSA as small as one.
As small as one customer?
As small as one premise, yes.
Wow. Okay.
You know, in areas where there's no, that's, you know, that allows us to ensure that we are creating PSAs that accommodate multiple interests. When we're looking at a map of dots, there are areas throughout the state where you got one premise throughout with no neighbors for miles and no wired infrastructure getting to them. You know, I think we can safely assume that those are some of the areas where we might see extremely high cost threshold being met. And when that extremely high cost threshold is met, we have to look to other technologies, wireless, satellite.
Got it. So I'm curious about the approach also on the whole concept. What was talked about briefly earlier is that some of the PSAs may have a certain percentage of population within them that are, say, for example, non-year-round residents, you know, like camps and things like that. I think that was mentioned earlier. Is there any additional weighting being given to, if you will, more the year-round locales, PSAs, where there's a concentration of actual communities, where there's thriving community activity versus around it, you know, just general terms around a lake where there's a bunch of seasonal camps?
Yeah, at this time there's not, and that's really because the FCC data does not account for seasonality of location. It only accounts for if the location exists and if it has service.
Well,
Got it.
and I think that's actually to the benefit of the communities, because if they still count as unserved and eligible for the program, then it's increasing the density in the area.
Right.
And an address is an address. So, and because nothing guarantees that what might be a seasonal premise now might not become a year-round premise at another point too.
Right.
So, understanding that it's all draft still. I know we were sort of hoping to have some little inkling of what it looked like in our area. Is there anything specific that you can share yet with that understanding that it's draft?
No, I don't, not at this time, I can't. And that's really just because Megan continues. I think she's gonna keep working on it up until the 12th. And even then after. I think my kind of question back to you all is, based on what you know of your area, are there things that we should consider as those PSAs are developed?
I mean, you've heard us say for a few times now that, like, Winter Harbor is 85% served with Spectrum, though
Mhm.
I know Sandy will be the first to say that served is a relative term,
Sure.
and Gouldsboro closer to the 50% mark. Not that we've done a lot of collaboration so far, but I know we've talked about Steuben. Steuben has no Spectrum
Will, your
service.
audio dropped.
Oh, did it?
I can hear you.
Oh, I couldn't hear him.
Any better?
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know. Maybe it's the cat. You know, Steuben we've talked to, and they have basically DSL and satellite, and maybe there's an isolated little fiber customer here or there, but they would be, in my mind, an entire community that's unserved and geographically very close to Gouldsboro. I know that there are some addresses in the unorganized territory that are nearby that
Mhm.
there's a person who's on the Hancock County Planning Commission who's said, we'd love to get those addresses served as well. So there's just a lot right in
Yeah.
that general area that I think makes sense to try to treat together.
Okay.
And Steuben, I think, really does with no Spectrum service location in it. I think that adds to the great bulk of unserved addresses. So.
I would also piggyback on that. Hancock County Planning Commission has just organized the municipalities, including those areas. The town managers are currently meeting and discussing ways to collaborate on efforts, and broadband was brought up as one of those priorities. It wasn't the top. I think it was the third in the list. Safety. I don't remember. I just scanned the notes. I just got them a few days ago, but I've been on vacation. So the communities here are trying to work heavily together on important things. So that's definitely worth considering.
So.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, especially as I'm very well of your work within these two communities, but also how that infrastructure and some of that overlap when you're looking at Steuben and others. And again, locations, regardless of municipality, plantation, unorganized territory, they're all considered by their location, not by their structure or town structure. So we could see those grouped together. And I didn't say this earlier. I feel like I focus a little bit on like we will probably cross municipal boundaries, but there could also be communities that have more than one PSA within their community, just based on where those locations fall. I feel like we see this more when you've got kind of that downtown kind of prominently in the middle area that has been served by either fiber or cable. And then as you get farther away from that center, you're seeing those unserved dots, pick up. While we might be able to group them together, there might be times where it's just not possible to group them together and stay within the guidelines that have been put forward by NTIA.
Pedro, you may have already said this, but was there a priority ordering of which PSAs are going to be addressed first? And secondly, in our history working together, initially we had talked about how we've been involved with grants and with Island Institute, et cetera, that this was an advantage for us, but I wonder if we've since lost that advantage now with this new alignment.
So there's no priority within the PSAs. I can't really speak to what happens post PSA selection and contract. I think that's where we're going to have to understand how those eligible applicants and awardees are prioritizing their builds, right? If the timeline for BEAD investments in infrastructure go through 2028, there will have to be a prioritization across those. And I think there's going to be a lot of considerations. You've got community as a consideration, those that have already rallied. You've got existing infrastructure and builds, you've got location. I think it's safe to assume where there are more readily available crews to deploy into an area, the higher up on that prioritization it'll be as we look at some of our more remote areas where it's harder to get crews to that place. Those might be, I wouldn't say deprioritized, but grouped together so that when you're sending a crew 3 hours north, they're able to do a lot all at once. Some of it will also come down to make ready and pole ownership and who those winning bids go to in areas where make ready will have to occur, that's going to be a longer timeline than in areas where it won't have to occur. And I would say that I would continue to say that some of the benefit of having community organizing is going to be in the scoring, being able to put those community points. I want to say there's 8 points. It might be 9. I haven't talked about it for a little while, but those points to a bid and a provider where there's more than one bid. The other is, for instance, with these PSAs, ensuring that we are taking all things into consideration with PSAs. There's a lot of areas where there's no community participation, no community feedback. So we're just grouping PSAs based on dots and the data points that we know, but with very little localized feedback.
So it sounds like mid-September is when there will be information to actually look at, even though it'll still be draft,
Yeah.
most likely at that point.
Yeah, so I don't know when your next meeting is, but I think as soon as the PSA map is live, I can send you that link for your
Mhm.
group so that you all can look at it and poke around in it. And if you want to send me, feedback via email, I welcome that. If you want me to join that next meeting after you've been able to kind of look through it and digest it, happy to do that instead. I will want to double check with our data analyst, Megan Grable, and just make sure her timing for feedback on it. So.
Go ahead, Sandy.
I was just gonna say, so down the road, would it be helpful, do you think, Roy, to have Kendra Jo speak with the regional town meeting? Like maybe after September, probably, that we get the information. I don't know how soon that the town managers would want to know. It probably makes more sense, I guess, for us to review what the outcome is, what the PSAs are, and then take it to the,
So I was thinking once we had more information about the PSAs
Yeah.
that we find ourselves in, that we would take that information to the select boards locally.
Mhm.
This Hancock County group, I mean, is that every Hancock County town government?
no,
Or
no. This is a Scudic regional meeting, so
Okay.
it's specifically Winter Harbor, Goldsboro, Sorrento, Sullivan. I'm forgetting somebody. I thought Sorrento, no, Sorrento wouldn't be in there because they're Washington County.
No, Sorrento's
No, not
Hancock
Sorrento.
County.
Sorry, I was thinking,
Steuben.
yeah, I was thinking Steuben. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and they were looking at, I was just reviewing their 3 priorities right now. We're paving, public safety, and housing. The
Mhm.
public safety and housing also have some interwoven broadband interest as well.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
broadband was several times.
I know public safety, they're all dealing with shortages on EMTs and um, fire staffing. So,
Yeah.
um, so I
Well,
don't know how much Sullivan and Sorrento, I've approached them a couple different times on this, and Sullivan has really not been, I mean, Don Snoke is very much involved, and I think his big thing was they opened up a lot of new service addresses for Spectrum, and then he helped organize that Starlink uplink site. And I think from the perspective of Sullivan is that they're pretty well served. Sorrento,
Mm.
one of the select board members, same idea. The only problem they run into is long driveways. And
Yep.
and Spectrum doesn't want to install unless you pay $9,000 to $15,000 to get them to run the cable. So I didn't get much feedback from them. So I'd say probably I I don't know that I don't know it'd be productive to go to that level of a meeting, but as we get to as we get some concrete information, whether it's one meeting with both select boards in attendance of some sort or the town managers, or we just attend a select board meeting each, then we can share what we know. And I don't know that we necessarily need to drag Kendra Jo into that, because I think given the level of feedback I've gotten from both select boards over the last 2 years, when I've been at the meetings, there hasn't been a whole lot of deep questions about it. You know,
Mhm.
a lot of conceptual stuff, not so much the deep stuff.
Gotcha.
Drag me anywhere you want. I would, yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are helpful for municipal officials to know and understand. I'm just going to share this as well real quick. So, one of them is this map that's on our policy page. This is a public map people can look at. So you mentioned Sullivan. I
Mhm.
think it's good for them to understand that there is a served customer in their community, one lucky person. There is a large density of cable, and just knowing Sullivan's efforts to date, that's not surprising. I use Sullivan as an example of, like, if you want to make something happen, they went door to door and tried and got customers for enough of the quota met for Charter to build out roads. But they have 16 no connection, 72 unserved. So they do have, just shy of 90 locations that are BEAD eligible. And that will, I think that's important for them to know that there's, about 90 locations that are BEAD eligible that will be invested in, that will be bid on by an eligible entity through this process. That there are still roughly 90 folks in their community that are struggling with DSL, satellite, wireless, or no connection at all.
Yeah. And, one of the things, and I just bring this up from our discussions with Simon Thorne, is that if Consolidated was going to bid on a town, he said they would literally, or bid on an area, they would try to build out to the entirety of that area, even if
Yeah.
it's not going to be covered by BEAD. Because
Mhm.
it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to try and carve out areas that you're specifically not going to serve and not going to
Yeah.
improve.
Yeah. And we've seen that, particularly for ILEC providers that already have a presence in a community. Their goal is to pick up everything that they pass. We're seeing it both with cable providers and with fiber providers. Their goal is to pick up everything that they pass, regardless of whether it's in our grant or not in our grant. They know where they can and can't use our funds, but if there's a customer that they're passing, they're going to pick it up. And I think that's helpful for us, because in some of the areas, it's going to mean that there's options for folks who didn't have options for the roughly 70% of Maine that is underserved. Not quite good enough internet, but not terrible enough to be counted. It does mean that number is going to drop, because they are going to be passed and the infrastructure along the way is going to be updated. I think that's always where I start with municipal officials, and really any community member, is with this map, to just put numbers to the problem. And while I can't put locations to the problem unless they give me a location to look at, because the FCC map is by location, but I try not, I kind of avoid it. I know I'm being recorded, but I kind of avoid it unless they have an actual address that we want to look at, because it can get a little cumbersome and confusing. Then I agree that the PSAs, and where I stand right now is, like, I think there's going to be a lot more outreach. There's a lot more that I can share when we have a visual of those PSAs, and we can talk about what this looks like, and what this will look like in the future. I think the other update, and probably maybe less important for some folks, is that qualification list. Like, who are the eligible entities we're actually talking about? Are there any new folks? Are there providers who've been in the space and maybe haven't done fiber to the premise, but under BEAD they are looking to invest more in fiber to the premise? We are definitely seeing that with some of our cable providers, even some of our traditionally wireless providers wanting to deepen some of their fiber footprint to then enhance wireless connectivity. So I think that these funds, as well as just the space is rapidly changing, and you all have been at this for long enough, you've seen those changes. You know, one month someone could say, no, we're not interested in your community, and 3 months later they could all of a sudden be interested. The last thing that I would say is there's definitely a lot of activity happening in the private space separate from BEAD right now, because folks are trying to be first to market. And if there's enough density and maybe community support to get the take rate that they're looking for, or even just shy of the take rate they're looking for, they're going to do it ahead of BEAD, so they're not leaving it to chance. So where I know you've talked to some providers, especially those incumbents in the past, you know, it's interesting to kind of see where they, on their own, have been chipping away at their footprint and trying to just ensure that they are retaining their customer base or enhancing their customer base, especially where they're doing upgrades from a DSL or a cable to fiber to the premise.
We in Winter Harbor have an important date coming up on Friday, September 20th. Comprehensive Plan is going through a visioning session. And I can't tell you how many times people have been asking me what's going on with broadband and when are things going to happen. Would it be possible for you to help me work on like a
Yeah.
back card or just something? I want to get the map out and share it with people, and maybe a QR code
Yeah.
so they can learn more about what is happening so that they make an informed decision once we get to that point.
Absolutely. You said the 27th,
20th, Friday the
20th, 1 week before. And what time?
The event, we're doing a bean dinner from 5 to 6 and from 6 to 7:30, Hancock County Planning Commission is coming to run a visioning session.
Okay.
Is that going to be remote participation or that's only in person?
Only in person. Winter Harbor doesn't do virtual.
Yeah,
What a silly question, Roy. Come on.
no, I just figured I'd make sure it was out there.
Yes, would love to have you.
Great.
It's meant for
Um,
residents, but we want people that have an vested interest to be participating as well. And the whole peninsula has a vested interest, really.
yeah, happy to support in any prep. Also happy to support if attendance would be helpful.
Do you work
So.
with Hancock County Planning Commission already?
Yep, they are. I work with them a lot, as well as they work with one of our regional travel broadband partners in the area. They do a lot of the Hancock County support on digital equity and municipal digital skills building.
Yeah, cool. I'll try to get that connection going later this week. I'm just getting back today.
Yeah, no problem. Sounds good. I know Avery
Yeah.
had a meeting earlier this week. She's on vacation right now, so
Yeah, if you have a
Yeah.
placeholder and if that's available as a tentative,
Yep.
and then we'll figure out if something can work out.
sure, I put it on my calendar. So
And Roy,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if you're available that day as well, that's great.
September 20th.
Yeah.
Oh, let me look here. That feels like a Thursday.
Friday.
It's a Friday. Of
Yeah.
course, it's a
Yeah.
Friday.
You don't need to answer right now, and I didn't
Yeah.
mean to drop that into a report.
No, that's all right. We'll see what it can be. Remind me as we get closer. September's filling up a little bit for me. But just purely, not purely, but only somewhat out of selfish and self-interest here. As a Franklin resident, you brought up the map for Sullivan.
Yeah.
What is the data that you have for Franklin? Because I know we've talked before, Franklin's kind of low-hanging fruit. There's fiber already here that feeds Eastbrook. So I'm just curious what that would look like, since a good chunk of the town already has the backbone in place.
yeah, let me.
And we do have a broadband committee, but we haven't met for quite some time. Because they're waiting to see
Franklin.
what happens with Schoodic.
Oh,
Did you say Franklin?
Yes, Franklin in Hancock County. It's right next to Sullivan.
There we go. I was like, why is it kicking me all the way over to New Hampshire? There we go.
Not Franklin County.
No, is there a town of Franklin
Yes,
that's on
there
the eastern? Yeah, two towns of Franklin in Maine.
No, there shouldn't be two Franklin towns. That's weird.
I don't know why it was kicking me all the way over there. Here we go. So town of
Similar.
Franklin, similar.
91.
Yep. Large underserved population, larger served population, but yeah, still similar. Um, in terms of those no connection and unserved locations. And then if I go to our home page, there is the density map, which helps me to kind of see where those locations might fall.
Yeah, I'm thinking up around the top end of George's Pond. It's basically the areas that were developed since grassroots cable was first brought into the area. All right, so
Yep. So you've got some cable density there. You've got your unserved and no connections really throughout this
Okay.
area.
Yeah.
Down into here, but you've got cable density. You're served. Looks like it's way up here.
That's Eastbrook.
Okay,
Up
that's
there.
Eastbrook. So,
Yep.
mm,
Well, actually,
wonder where-
that little band of green right there, I'm not sure what that would be. That's um, that's
so
a weird, interesting band of green there. But
yeah,
Eastbrook is up north of there, unless it's entirely possible, I guess. Maybe Consolidated did enroll some people that were in Franklin,
mhm.
even though they didn't pay to deploy in Franklin like they did in Eastbrook.
Yeah, I would say this is where we're seeing any served premises in this area. Everything else is looking like cable and then a mix of cable and unserved all through.
Yeah.
All throughout. What is this little? Might just be a pond, river.
Yeah, that's there's a solar farm out there now too, and a lot of
Okay,
trees.
interesting. Yeah, so looking at a lot of fiber density.
Yep.
Then it starts to fall away.
And that so right underneath the word Franklin,
Mhm.
A happens to be right where my house is, literally under the
Okay.
F in Franklin. And
In
the
the pink or the blue?
right on the border. I'm right on
Oh,
that road. That
yep.
that little square on the corner of Shipyard Point Road, right there. But I
Okay.
can reach out, I could almost reach out through my window here and touch the fiber, because that's 3-ring binder going
That's
by.
coming up 180. Yep, 182.
Yeah. So the opportunity is there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, a lot of low hanging fruit. So maybe that would be nice to, who knows? Any case, I guess we will wait and see what happens in September. I don't know. It's not next on the agenda, Sandy, but what do you feel? Should we meet again in September, or should we let things settle out and meet in October? We've done every 2 months recently because there really hasn't been a lot to do. That doesn't mean we couldn't get updates and circulate information
Yeah.
over email. But I don't know that it's, are we going to have something worth meeting and discussing if we can share the information that comes out of this over email? You're muted. You're muted, Sandy.
Sorry. I was just saying that I think there's value in having conversation when the information comes out. Just so we can strategize what are the next steps and is it another sit and wait, or are the communities feeling like they need to look at some other alternative?
Yeah, I get that, but when's your approval theoretically for the ideally
For-
that you
For
expect?
final PSAs,
Right,
I really couldn't tell you.
okay.
Were we thinking a couple weeks though, so that it might be available
So
by?
the draft PSAs will be open September 12th. But those are draft until NTIA finalizes them. And I don't recall at the moment if they have a set timeline or if it just happens to happen before our subgrantee selection process opens.
Because your timeline headed out after this is it becomes very vague very quickly.
Yes. We kind of only know what's real right in front of us because everything
Mhm.
else is based on another decision. So it's like we anticipate subgrantee selection process kicking off at the end of fall because we anticipate that they will turn the final PSAs around, within a month to us. But if for some reason that took longer, then everything gets pushed out.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were saying the drafts would be available to us and that's the information we'd be considering.
Yes, the drafts will be. Roy was asking about final version of
Okay.
those.
You just said the end of fall. Now, do you mean the beginning of fall? Because end of fall would be December.
I guess I think of the end of fall being November.
Okay,
We already started fall. Fall. How about just fall?
okay,
Yeah, I mean, I think we anticipate that if we're doing pre-qualification from mid-September through mid of October, and we're able to get a final PSAs by, late October, maybe early November, then we're able to turn around our subgrantee selection process in that kind of November, December timeframe.
we can
Yeah.
always try to schedule a meeting if we have something, but I just feel like
Yeah.
September.
October's fine.
Okay, end of
Yeah.
October.
Okay. Yeah, and so what will happen is I will send you, Roy, I know that you're around on some of our board calls and participating in that. So I'm sure that you will see them, but I will make sure that I send the link out to you when it is live.
Okay.
And that way you can share it with your committee and then, welcome any responses or feedback via email. And if there's a meeting set up that you guys want to pull me in even for a half an hour, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Sounds
Well, I
good.
guess we're still in a holding pattern, but we're holding pattern a little closer to the end result, hopefully. And
Hopefully. Super. Thank you for your
All right.
time.
yeah, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
All right, have a good day.
You too.
You too. Bye. Oh, I just realized that I'm the host.
Oh yeah, let me reclaim host. You can do it or I can do
I
it.
was like, I don't think you want me to end it.
Yeah, I think you need to make me the host again.
There we go.
Where's
Okay.
Sam?
Oh, she just left you.
Well, okay.
Okay. Have a good night, Roy. Thank
Have
you.
a good night. And having lost the rest of the committee for the evening, I'm going to, without objection, declare the meeting adjourned at 4:58. Tabling whatever items we still have left to work on.